Emotions are running high in Minnesota and across the nation following the deadly shooting of a woman by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis.
Within the last 90 minutes, the governor ordered the National Guard to stage and be ready to support law enforcement if needed. Here's the latest. The FBI is now the sole agency investigating what happened, removing the Minnesota BCA from the case. Why state leaders are concerned with that move.
Late this afternoon,
1:03 a.m. Minneapolis-St. Paul Metro. 1 million fentanyl pills recovered, $47 million in bulk cash and frozen accounts, 73 coordinated warrants, 14 front companies, one family at the center. And when the lights went out across parts of Minnesota, when entire blocks went black, like someone had pulled the plug on the state federal agents, were already moving. They called it a power disruption inside the operation briefings. They called it something else. They called it the moment the North Star Syndicate realized the government was done asking questions. And if you think this story is about fentanyl alone, stay with it, because the next part is worse. At 4:32 a.m., the first doors came off their hinges. Not in a movie way, not with dramatic pauses and perfect timing. Real timing, the kind where the steel screams, the wood splinters, and every second is measured in heartbeats. The fog lay low. Over the industrial grid south of St. Paul, clinging to the asphalt-like breath, warehouse districts that usually smelled like diesel and melted snow now smelled like cold metal and adrenaline. Neon from a late-night tire shop buzzed and flickered. Somewhere far off, a siren tried to sound calm and failed. FBI blackjackets, D-raid rigs, ICE tactical teams, local SWAT folded into federal command like muscle into bone. DHS liaisons in unmarked SUVs, watching a map that didn't look like a map anymore. It looked like a battlefield. They hit multiple targets at once. A medical billing office in Bloomington glass doors. Tasteful logo, soft lighting rig. The waiting room chairs were still set up like patients would arrive at 9. A suburban property development firm in Eden Prairie Stone. Facade, polished lobbyware. The back room had a safe wall thick enough to stop a rifle round. A chain of so-called wellness clinics across the metro massage fronts and rehabilitation consultancies, where the paperwork looked clean. The books looked perfect, and the air inside smelled faintly of bleach. And then the real places, the warehouse off Highway 55. The storage units with no names. The refrigerated truck bays that never refrigerated anything. At 4:36 a.m., a team stacked on a steel service door behind a logistics depot marked as North Star Freight Solutions. The sign was new. The security cameras were newer. The building itself had no reason to be that secure. A breacher's ram struck once, twice, on the third hit. The lock failed, and the door kicked inward. A pressure slap, the kind that makes teeth vibrate. Agents poured in like water finding cracks. Inside, the air was warmer than it should have been, dry and chemical. The floor was taped into lanes. Pallets were shrink-wrapped like any normal shipping operation. Except these pallets weren't full of consumer goods, they were full of death. Brown cardboard boxes, stamped with fake pharmaceutical codes. Plastic bins stacked to the ceiling. And inside them, bottle after bottle of pressed Pills Blue Chalky, uniform each one, capable of stopping a heart. A suspect ran toward the back, clutching a duffel bag so heavy it bounced against his hip. Another tried to slide behind stacked crates and disappear. A third went for a side exit, found it chained from the outside, and turned back into the arms of a federal agent. Hands down now. It cracked, short, and panicked. Somewhere deeper in the building, a single shot, then Tamura turned fire, controlled, measured, ending the argument fast. In a side room behind a false wall, agents found the cash, not in piles, in bricks, shrink-wrapped stacks of 20s and 100s, strapped tight, labeled with numbers like inventory. $47 million wasn't all in the room. It no is. But enough was there to make agents pause for half a second, just long enough to feel the weight of what they were walking through. Then a voice over the radio. Second location is hot. At 4:41 a.m., a separate strike team hit a clinic in Minnetonka. The front door was locked. The sign read, Cauldron Healthcare Consulting. Inside, the walls were painted calming. Beige posters about recovery and patient care. A receptionist's desk with a bowl of mints. Behind the desk, a keypad. Behind the keypad, a corridor that didn't appear on any blueprints. Agents pushed through. The corridor led to a server room, and that's where the story changed. Not pills, not cash, not guns. A humming rack of encrypted drives, a sealed steel box bolted to the concrete, and a ledger, handwritten, old school, the ink thick and angry. Names, numbers, dates, not street dealers, not couriers. People in suits, people who signed documents, people who got sworn in. And when an agent flipped one page too many, The room went quiet for a beat, like everyone suddenly realized they weren't standing in a drug operation anymore. They were standing in a governance problem. At 5:02 a.m., the blackout hit. Not everywhere, selective, targeted, industrial sectors first. Then parts of the outer suburbs. Then a slice of the downtown grid where cameras fed into city systems. You're sitting there watching this, and maybe you're thinking, that's too cinematic. But the truth is, the most dangerous operations don't look like chaos. They look like planning, because someone had planned for the raids. Someone had planned for the cameras. Someone had planned for the moment the agents walked in. And Minnesota went dark right when the door breached on the Calderon offices. Like a hand reached into the state and pinched the power lines. At 6:18 a.m. in a federal cyber forensics lab outside Minneapolis. The fluorescent lights were too bright, and the coffee was already cold. Analysts sat behind screens filled with cascading code, recovered drive images, and forensic timelines that looked like heartbeat monitors. They weren't celebrating, they were working. Because seizures are the loud part. The quiet part is where you learn what you really took. By 7:06 a.m., a DHS specialist had cracked the first layer. By 7:19 a.m., the FBI's cyber unit had mirrored the contents across secure servers. By 7:41 a.m., a network diagram began to form lines, nodes, clusters spreading across the screen like a parasite mapping veins. Someone had labeled it in the code. Not a name like Calderon, a project title. Project Northwind, a logistics blueprint, a financial machine. Shell companies with clean logos and dirty books. Ghost corporations tied to mailbox addresses. Sham charities with patriotic names and silent bank accounts. Restaurant groups that never made enough revenue to justify their cash flow. Real estate shells that bought properties no one ever lived in. Money moved in layers. Clinic invoice, charity donation. Property acquisition, consulting fee, logistics contract. Then offshore routing split into microtransfers that looked like normal business. Except the transfers weren't normal. They were timed. Timed with seizures in other states. Timed with border slowdowns. Timed with law enforcement shift changes. And then, there it was. The main authorization key. A signature, not a handwritten one. A digital signature, unique, persistent, embedded inside the encrypted admin files that controlled the routing software. Richard Rick Calderon, publicly. He was a healthcare contractor, a developer, a man who cut ribbons at grand openings and posed for photos with glossy brochures. Privately, he was something else, a criminal financier, a patriarch, a man who didn't touch the pills himself, because he didn't need to. He touched the system. His key authorized warehouse releases, his key approved clinic reimbursements, his key greenlit trucking routes, his key controlled the courier network, and then the analysts found Melissa Calderon, not in a photo, in the spreadsheets, Melissa Calderon, Shell Company director, the architect of the laundering layers, the person who made the dirty money look like insurance payments and property income, Daniel Calderon, warehouse operations manager, the distribution spine, the one who ensured the pills moved like clockwork through the Midwest corridors, Eric von Courier network supervisor, the recruiter, the man who built an interstate lattice of drivers, runners, and contractors who thought they were just hauling freight. Thomas Koenig, corrupt, meticulous, patient. The kind of man who could hide a river of cash in a spoonful of numbers. This wasn't corruption. This was command-level collusion. This wasn't negligence. This was engineered treason against communities that never consented to become a drug corridor. And just as the lab screens filled with proof, a supervisor's voice cut through the room. Stand by. Next phase is live, because the raids you saw in the dark. That was only the first strike. The eradication was coming. At 5:12 a.m. the next morning, before sunrise could soften anything, a command center lit up inside a secured federal facility. On the wall, a digital map. Minnesota, then the surrounding states, dozens of red markers pulsed across Minneapolis. St. Paul, Shakopee, Maple Grove, Burnsville, Brooklyn Park, then farther. Wisconsin corridors, Iowa routes, Dakota cut-throughs. Every marker wasn't just a location. It was a piece of the North Star Syndicate's breathing apparatus. And the agents were about to pull the plug. Over 1,000 federal personnel were assigned to the operation, dozens of SWAT teams integrated under Joint Task Force Command. Armored units staged near warehouse corridors. Black Hawk helicopters on standby, not for spectacle, but for speed, for containment, for the moments when suspects tried to run and the ground units couldn't afford to chase. Air support wasn't just a threat, it was a statement, a reminder that the sky belongs to someone else when federal orders drop. The mission was simple in wording and brutal in reality. Hit everything at once. No leaks, no warnings. No time for the syndicate to move assets. At 5:37 a.m., teams moved. A desert-colored warehouse outside the metro hidden behind legitimate freight operations was revealed as a pill processing hub. Agents breached machines were still warm. Press molds coated in residue. Powder bins stacked like flour sacks. Fentanyl doesn't need a tonnage to devastate a city. It needs a schedule. And the North Star Syndicate had perfected scheduling. At 6:04 a.m., a mansion in the rich hills outside the city registered under a real estate shell was hit. You know the type. Gated drive, heated floors, security cameras disguised as landscape lights. Inside, agents found what you don't expect in a suburban palace. Weapons caches, encrypted phones, a safe room with printed route maps and code words, and a hidden vault with more cash stacked like insulation. At 6:29 a.m., a convoy was intercepted on an interstate corridor, trucks marked as medical supplies. Drivers with clean licenses, cargo manifests that looked perfect. But the dogs didn't care about paperwork. They hit the scent, and everything after that moved fast. Door seals broken, panels removed, boxers opened. More pills, more narcotics, more proof that the syndicate wasn't moving product like criminals. They were moving it like a corporation. At 7:10 a.m., another team found a communication hub, not a single laptop in a closet, a server farm, cooling fans, battery backups, a redundant network designed to survive raids. And that's when a federal agent voiced tight professionals said a sentence no one wanted to hear. Planned for us by noon, key lieutenants were in custody. Warehouses secured, assets frozen, front offices sealed with federal tape. And in 6 hours, the underworld took more damage than it had in 6 years. But it still wasn't the worst part, because when investigators pulled the data from seized servers, the betrayal wasn't only in bank transfers and routing logs, it was in badges, in schedules, in internal emails that should have never existed. At 2:17 p.m., an investigator opened a folder labeled Shift Adjustments. Inside, patrol grids altered border-adjacent checkpoints down for maintenance at precise windows. Way stations shut at the exact times convoys passed. Anonymous tips redirected away from syndicate sites. And then the internal leak logs. Raid dates that showed up in private messages before warrants were even served. The North Star Syndicate didn't just buy protection. They built a parallel enforcement system, a second police force. Not wearing uniforms, but controlling the system. From the inside, investigators counted compromised personnel officers, border-adjacent agents, clerical coordinators, and judicial facilitators who smoothed paperwork and delayed warrants. They had been paid in layers, cash drops, consulting fees, mortgage, assistance, family scholarships through sham nonprofits. An honest officer still in uniform, still showing up for works, dared at the list and looked like he'd been hit. Because betrayal doesn't always come with a gun. Sometimes it comes with a handshake and a paycheck. By evening, federal agents were arresting senior figures people who weren't supposed to be in the story at all. A deputy-level planner who had access to tactical calendars. A logistics coordinator who moved resources for the department. An internal analyst who lost reports. Each arrest wasn't just a win, it was a wound, because every compromised badge meant someone out there had trusted the wrong person. And the system, the thing people rely on when they call 911, had been used as a tool for a drug empire. The message from the task force was cold and final. The badge will be rebuilt from the ground up, and then the operation zoomed out. Because Minnesota wasn't the whole machine. It was a hub, a clean, stable hub, perfect for moving fentanyl under the cover of legitimate Midwestern logistics. Trucking contractors ran routes that looked like normal commerce. Restaurant chains provided cash flow camouflage. Medical billing fronts turned poison into reimbursement. Real estate shells turned bulk cash into appreciating assets. Shipping manifests were altered. Container weights adjusted. Maintenance schedules mysteriously aligned with convoy movement. And when investigators mapped the corridors, it wasn't just a Minnesota story anymore. It was a Midwestern artery feeding multiple states. A network capable of moving staggering quantities of narcotics every week without tripping alarms, because alarms don't work when the people who manage them have been paid to look away. The final file recovered from the Northwind server wasn't a confession. It was a plan, a phase document, a roadmap that described Minnesota as a permanent distribution anchor. A long-term headquarters, not just infiltration, redesign, a future where the syndicate didn't hide beneath the system. It became the system. And that's the chilling realization you're supposed to sit with. This wasn't a cartel sneaking into a state. This was a state being remodeled into a cartel, fortress quietly, legally, contract by contract, invoice by invoice. So what does that leave you with? It leaves you with a warning, because power doesn't always need open violence. Sometimes it only needs silence, ambition, and a few people willing to turn a blind eye while everyone else is trying to survive. The real cost isn't just money. It's the neighborhoods hollowed out by fentanyl, the families shattered by overdose calls that come too late, the lives lost to cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, one a different door into the same darkness. And in this fictional story, the North Star Syndicate learned a lesson too. When federal agencies move as one FBID, ICE DHS, SWAT, there is no shadow deep enough to hide in forever. If you're still watching, tap like so more people see this story. And comment expose if you want this kind of corruption dragged into the light fictional here, but rooted in the very real dangers of organized crime and political infiltration. And one last time, so there's no confusion, this was fiction, a dramatization, a warning told as a thriller, because sometimes the only way to understand the stakes is to feel them.